Okay. Grazie Martina. Okay, good evening everyone and welcome. Kalispera Seolus, even though we have Greek colleagues with us tonight. I hope everybody can hear me on Zoom too. If something happens or you don't see or you don't hear anything, just write on the chat. We have two full-time moderators that will engage with you. Okay, so welcome everybody. As I was saying, it's a pleasure to see you here tonight and virtually also. This is the first appointment of our series of seminars, of conferences that is called Seminaria tu Tritu Orofu, so seminars of the third floor. The idea of the name comes from the original place where these seminars were conceived. So the class, the lesson class, the seminar class that we have at the third floor of the Italian school. That is where usually students and postdocs have their courses during the year. So a very cherished place for everybody who was here in the school or he is in the school right now, but definitely a very small place for the little crowd that we have tonight and that we hope to see even more in bigger numbers for the next seminars. The idea of the seminar came in 2018 by the postdocs of that academic year. They wanted to create a safe space for discussion, I would say, inviting people to convey lessons and seminars that are somehow related to their research interests. The main public that the postdocs of the time and nowadays we would like to invite both as speakers and as public, of course, are especially, well, students, since you know that the peculiarity of the Italian school is to have a full-time in-house specialization school and course for young archaeologists, and also young scholars. So to have a space for discussion and scientific exchange that would be fresh and not so stressful for people talking and for people discussing and asking questions. The idea also is an example here tonight with our host coming from the French school, but also with all the Greek actors of archaeological research in Greece. So the Euphoria, of course, the Archaeological Service, the Idri might have known, so the Research Foundation, the National Research Foundation, the universities that Athens have, and of course also the Ministry of Culture. The idea is to create a network of young researchers and researchers working in Greece on the antiquity of Greece in diachrony. It is a great effort, as you can imagine, but this series of seminars never stopped, not even during the pandemic. And in fact, the seminars of the pandemic years were held online on Zoom. And this is why we decided this year to have a blended opportunity, so a blended presentation for people who were brave enough to come here today, even though the strike is still raging. Thank you very much. And for people who didn't get here or are far away and are following us online. And also in the next few days, you will be able to find the recording of this session online on the YouTube channel of the school and on the site. As I was saying at the beginning, I'm very happy to welcome you here. I am honored and lucky enough to be the first one to to host the seminar tonight. So I give you my welcome also on behalf of the director of the Italian school, Professor Emanuele Papi, who is not in Greece right now, he's not in Athens right now. So he welcomes you from far away. I will stop talking about the seminars right now. I will just tell you that, of course, questions and discussion after the presentation of Adrien is most welcome. But we'll also have a little reception with a glass of wine. So if you're too shy to ask him something after the presentation, you can try with a glass of wine later. So coming to our guest of honor of tonight, I'm very happy to have here, I would say, a rising star of Laconian archaeology, Adrien Delahaye. He's scientific member of the École fraçaise, so the French school of Athens, where he's pursuing a project about Laconian pottery, as you can imagine, and in particular about the history of circulation networks of Laconian pottery in the Mediterranean and in the Aegean. His main challenge, I would say, is to challenge the old theory that we already have about Laconian pottery, that, as you know, is a peculiar material. Well known, I would say, there's still a lot to say about it. So he's challenging mostly production ideas that we have, circulation theories, the actors of distribution, and the context of use of these Laconian pottery. His project, of course, stems from his PhD dissertation, his PhD, which he obtained in Paris, so the first University of Paris, with professors Francis Pro and Françoise Rousset. The title of his dissertation was Archaeology and Images of Spartan Austerity, the Contribution of Laconian Iconography and Material Culture to the History of Sparta in between the 6th and the 5th century before Christ. His main idea was to challenge what he calls the Spartan mirage, that is, this idea, these preconcept ideas that we have about Sparta and its productions. So the main point, of course, was to challenge this idea of the Spartan austerity that would be present in every aspect of life. As you can imagine, spoiler alert, the conclusion of his thesis was that it is not such a given, it is not so written in stone that this austerity can be found also in pottery production. Coming to conclusion, Adrien is extremely active, as you can imagine, in the field too. He's a collaborator with the Amicus research project since 2015, where he's in charge of the publication of Laconian pottery and also archaic and classical pottery. He co-organized just this year the panel about archaeology in Sparta at the Celtic conference of this summer with Professor Stephen Hodkinson in Lyon. He's a former fellow of the Onassis Foundation and also a former Ater, so a former teaching assistant and research assistant at Paris and in Normandy, in Rouen and Caen. So it's my pleasure to leave the floor to Dr. Delahaye and a good seminar to everyone.
Isabella.
Oh, oui.
Oui.
Raison.
On change.
Alors. We have it. Wait a second.
Merci. Okay, merci. Buonasera, καλησπέρα σε όλους. Thanks for the rising star. I don't assume it totally. Like the title, the Aegean Sea, mother of all exchanges. That's a bit ambitious, a bit catchy, but too ambitious. I will just partly respond to this question tonight. So before I start, I would like to thank warmly Isabella and the Scuola Italiana di Atene. And to thank all of you for being here today. I know that it's a general strike day. Sorry for the cause. We couldn't postpone the paper. So yeah, thank you for being here. The aim of the paper today is to propose some hypotheses and some preliminary results about the distribution of the pottery between the late 7th and the mid 5th century BC. But before going further, I would like to underline that it's a work in progress. So nothing is finalized. The data set, as we say nowadays, is still incomplete, and the hypotheses I have, they can't be definitely proven yet, neither invalidated totally. So it's full of blanks, it's full of over-interpretations. The idea is to also to discuss with you about it. I'm very happy that Jerry Schoss is here tonight to discuss about it and about the flows of these preliminary results. So I won't detail about my PhD, you've done it very well, but let's say that the idea of my PhD and the postdoc project I am conducting now is to use the pottery as a material for history of exchanges, history of Laconia, and archaeology of exchanges, to use the pottery not only for ceramologists, but also in terms of historic interpretation. Greek pottery as a commodity played only a limited role in the exchanges of the Aegean, and it may be even more the case for the Laconian pottery, because it's a secondary production, secondary style, regional production, and the amounts are, let's say, little compared to the Attic and compared to the Corinthian or Ionian products. Nevertheless, Laconian vases can be used as a proxy and provide information about wider networks of exchanges. And that's why I focus on pottery, because pottery is what remains, you know it. And the idea is to use pottery to reach wider networks of goods, like perishable goods that we don't know anything about. That's ambitious, it doesn't work the main part of the time. That's why we need to rely on what we have on pottery. So in this perspective, I'm of course interested in the diffusion of artifacts, but the objective is to go further. Apart from the problem of the representativeness of the material discovered, the diffusion map do not really tell us anything about the underlying phenomena and the actors. So I want also to engage in the question of distribution, production, and consumption. To deal with ancient economies, as I was saying. So to do this, we need to put these objects within the frame of theoretical concepts such as trade and market. I won't detail, you know about it. It's a tricky question, ancient economies and how to deal with the ancient artifacts. But let's say that to be quick about it, that historians and archaeologists are not economists, that's a fact, and we don't have to be. It doesn't mean that we cannot use these tools. And recently, an approach between the primitivists and the modernists have, let's say, compromised approaches have emerged, and we can use now some concepts like regional markets. We can deal with the agency of the actors and with multi-scale analysis, connectivity. So there is room again to put the archaeological data sets and their diversity and their blanks within the reflection. So I won't go further within this question. It's not the goal of this paper. So let's focus on the regional market, because I chose to use this concept and the concepts of networks because they offer the possibility of multiple scales and actors, and they can underline, they can make appearing the fact that these the actors, the networks, the scales are entangled, they're embedded. I love these words in English. They don't have proper counterparts in French. The regional markets, even though they can be hard to define, hard to identify, they allow us to think at the regional scale, where the local and the trans-Mediterranean can be articulated, allowing us to not think too big, to not generalize conclusions from small assemblages and incomplete data sets. And also it allows us to include the variability of sources, actors, and phenomena. So it's an easy concept, easy, let's say, toolbox to use for ancient archaeologists which limits the risks of overinterpretation and allows the result of our different studies to be combined afterwards. Here. So having this idea of characterizing the regional markets of pottery production, the aim is then to answer to these basic that different manners, let's say. So I will today present the main objectives of the project. I will present some regional markets. I think I've been, or I am identifying, let's say, before focusing on a very specific area, the southwestern Aegean, more specifically on the connection between Laconia and Crete. I also want to mention that at some point I would like to conduct some network analysis, but at this point, let's say that I'm not there yet because I'm not yet well trained in these methodologies, and also I don't know yet how to deal with the gaps and with some methodological issues, like the fact that I want to deal with actors, and it's hard to include the actors in the modelizations available. The models of network analysis are good for objects and for, let's say, archaeological sites. The question of the mediation and of the actors of distribution is hard to include within these models. So you won't have any proper maps, proper models, spatial models today. The Aegean Sea is a space of exchanges and circulations par excellence. It seems not to fit well this image with the idea we have of Sparta, which is still often considered as austere and isolated. But this incompatibility is, however, more historiographic than historical, and is due to what Isabella was talking about, the Spartan mirage. So it's not from me, it's from François Ollier, and it's, let's say, a structural matter in all the Spartan studies field. So, to be brief about it, my position about the Spartan mirage on the basis of archaeological data, it's that this theory has no archaeological ground. I won't develop, we can discuss about it later. So, in this picture, Spartan society and economy are characterized by austerity and their closure to foreign trade. In contrast to these assumptions, Iron Malkin has highlighted the existence of what he called the Spartan Mediterranean. And this work constitutes a milestone which has made possible to take out Sparta from Peloponnese and to spread it all around the Mediterranean. But the paradox is that it also perpetuates the singularity of Sparta, because we talk about Spartan Mediterranean, but we don't talk about Sparta within the Mediterranean, within systems of exchanges. And the reason why is it's because Malkin used mythological sources. So the approach is not the same, the documentation is not the same, and in fact, it's not the conclusions cannot be extended for archaeological data. So it's a totally different approach. And if you take into account the realia, the archaeological data, the cartography and the conclusions, they differ extremely. So that's why I started to engage in this topic. In the case of pottery, the extensive studies of Konrad Stiebe and Fabien Coudin have demonstrated the extent of the diffusion of Laconian vases throughout the Mediterranean. But this work nowadays can be enriched for several reasons. In the case of pottery, no, I don't have any other, okay, doesn't matter. First, Konrad Stiebe, alongside with Paola Pelagatti, made the reference catalog that we still use nowadays for Laconian pottery. But the Stiebe's catalogs are selective, they're not exhaustive, and the data is not always quantified. It wasn't the goal of his study. Also, the conclusions of Stiebe, the datations, the typology are based on Western context, especially from southern Italy. So the Aegean is quite not invisible, but underestimated. As for Fabienne Coudin, she has proposed a useful quantitative study of the diffusion on a Mediterranean scale with graph quantities. But again, the conclusions are mainly valid for the West, and the data for the Aegean are strongly underestimated, while the modalities of distributions and the actors are not really fully addressed. So this is a map from Coudin, which is barely visible on the PowerPoint. So let's see what kind of material I'm using. My choice to use Laconian pottery as the main documentary category is justified by the volume of the corpus, its wide geographical distribution, and also its chronological spectrum from the late 7th to the 5th century BC. And the research focuses on three types of products. First, the black figured vases. We won't talk much about them today because they are well published, well known as usual for pottery. Then the black glazed vases of much more interest today, exported from the beginning of the 6th century, the late 7th century to the end of the 5th century BC. They have the widest chronological spectrum of exports, as well as a typology that is now well identified. And the majority of the Aegean material has not been the subject of any kind of full synthesis. And in the case of Crete, as we will see, very few attention had been accorded to Laconian pottery during the past years. And then the last category, the most difficult, let's say, the Laconian transport amphoras. They have a special position in the study because they are known only since 1989, and they remain poorly identified and little published, and they require an inventory for the Aegean. We know them, we know the typology through Paolo Pelagatti and Alan Johnston. We see them here and there in the Aegean, but there is no proper catalog, no proper synthesis. And since they are transport amphoras, they can allow us to reach another kind of exchanges, the goods, not only the vases, but what was inside, any kind of perishable goods. So until now, the preliminary quantification has enabled me to identify more than 2,000 artifacts on 97 sites. Among them, I have chosen 32 case studies that I will explore further. So it's statistical, quantitative at first, and then for the case studies, I will study the assemblages more thoroughly. So very quickly about the methodology, I don't want to lose time about this. Right now, I'm still gathering the data. But the objective at the end, as I told you, is to explore the question of the distribution from Laconian to an Aegean scale. The challenge here is to find the phenomena I was talking about before and the intermediation and the identity of the intermediate people, intermediate actors. Since Laconian pottery, that's one of the main trends of their study. We think that they have been probably transported by other actors who were polarizing the exchanges, the flows, like the Ionians, the Aeginetans, why not the Corinthians? You have different theories. I will go back on this later. While taking volumes into account, I also want to carry out a comparative approach to the typology of objects by studying the recurrence of certain typologies on the destination and redistribution sites by cross-referencing the Laconian pottery with the other exported productions here and there in the case studies sites. But I also want to conduct cross approach with written sources, epigraphy, and also numismatics, as we will see in the case of Crete. Until now, the hypothesis of major role for the Samian traders is often put forward for decades. Why? Because Samos was the main site of discovery for Laconian pottery. But this view have been strongly questioned recently, reassessed by Gerald Schoss in favor of Miletos, especially for the Laconian II style. And through this project, I want to explore also other options like Aegean. So now, very quickly, I would like to present you some regional markets and exchanges networks I'm trying to work on before focusing on Crete and Laconia. So first, kind of Ionian regional market with a major role of Miletos as an actor in distribution. In Samos, we have more than 300 artifacts. The numbers I'm presenting here are in minimal number of individuals. The numbers are not always secured. I still have to work on some place sites. In Samos, the sanctuaries of the Archean, the Artemision, and the Western Necropolis constituted until recently the main site of discovery for figured Laconian vases, as I was telling you. This material has been well published and studied by Conrad Stiebe and Maria Pipili, and it's still one of our major assemblages. So to explain the importance of the Samian market, a lot of causes have been evoked, like the existence of privileged relations between the island's aristocratic elites and the Spartans, as well as the potential role of Samian traders. But let's forget this for now. Then road. For this, perhaps Isabella, you could be of great help, because in Rosemead, what I know for now, it's just the material from some graves from the old excavations in Ialissos, Cameros, and Lindos. So I don't know if there are more from extreme excavations, for example. I guess probably, but I've not explored it yet.
There might be something, but it isn't published.
Okay, so
it's in the museum, but it's unpublished.
Okay, I could have a look. Thank you. Oh, yeah, we'll talk about it later. In any case, Rhodes and the Dodecanese, they are a place of interest because they could. It's a contact area between two potential, or at least networks of distribution. And they are from the known material is from a funerary context, so it's worth studying. Then Lydia. In Lydia, which is privileged area between the Greek world and the Persian Empire, the port of Smyrna, and the city of Sardis provided some Laconian material. It's interesting because it goes beyond the Greek world, and it's also because it questions the identity of the actors of distribution. Perhaps here again, Miletos will go back there afterwards. So Miletos now, it's potentially the missing link in explaining the distribution of Laconian pottery in Eastern Greece and beyond, in Lydia, for example. And the city, before the publication of Miletos, was a kind of small outlet. It was totally underestimated. But now, with this new publication, the view have totally changed with do I've put the numbers? Where is Miletos? I forgot. Ah, here it is. Okay, that's right. With more than 400 fragments. I don't remember the NMI though.
400 were catalogs, but there's many catalog pieces. So
hard to say.
Hard to say. 600.
Yeah, but in any case, yeah, it goes beyond Samos very probably. So it changes all the whole view, and it changes the whole idea we had about the distribution of Laconian pottery and of exchanges networks in the area. Then about the ramifications of this potential Milesian network, that's a very open question. It's the North Aegean, because there, during the last decades, thanks to the work of the University of Thessaloniki and of the efforts there, we've identified a lot of new material from Tharsos, for example, from the sanctuaries of the Artemision and the Heracleon, with at least 33 fragments from 21 new individuals, with also some inscribed churches, and Laconian pottery. We can discuss about it later. And then there is a lot of material also from Kavala, Argylos, Karagounaki, Akanthos, Thermis, Sane. I won't do all the list, but also Avdira and Methoni. So we see Laconian pottery appearing a bit everywhere in the area. And the question is, how did they get there? And you have also a high proportion of transport and forage, and the chronological range of the assemblages could allow us to conclude that commercial exchanges between the Northern Aegean and Laconia were relatively long-lasting over a period of at least 50 years, which could correspond more or less to the range of Miletos. And last, Pondos, the Black Sea, which was a blind spot in previous studies, in Fabien Coudin's studies, especially. Now, lately, thanks to the publication from Ukrainian colleagues, from Romanian colleagues, and Russian colleagues, we see more and more Laconian pottery appearing. And it's interesting if you think about Miletos, because of the Milesian colonization. And it's something I have to explore furthermore, but I would like to do two things there, to combine the map of diffusion of Laconian pottery in the Black Sea with to do contextual analysis of the assemblages there with other kind of imports, and to put the map of Milesian colonization and see what happens. And I've started to do so, and there are some interesting results, especially for Berezan. So Berezan, the island in front of Olbia in northern Black Sea. This material was known mainly from the collections in the Hermitage Museum in Russia, and now the material which is at the Odessa Museum, which was, I hope it's still there. Well, yeah, and it's published now thanks to Dupont and then the two others I don't remember now, Lungu and an Ukrainian colleague I don't remember. And it's what you have on the flyer of the conference, with these Laconian craters on the left, and on the right there are some Lydia. Where you have Laconian pottery, you can find some Lydian pottery. And these kind of associations within assemblages are only attested, as far as I've seen, only in Sardis and in Miletos, which is kind of interesting if you think about Milesian networks. So it's something I have to work on further. Then the second main hypothesis, the potential Aeginetan networks. So first, in Aegina, we have a lot of Laconian pottery. It's well known for decades, and it's one of the major case studies of the research. The material there comes from the sanctuary of Athena Aphea, which is not very surprising, and it has been extensively published by Dyfree Williams. We have at least 300 sherds of black glazed Laconian vases, with a minimum of 41 individuals based on the feet, on the bases, including 27 craters, 27 on 41. So you can see that you have an over representation of Laconian black glazed craters there. I say this because it's a very strong characteristic of all these sites you see there. A lot of black glazed Laconian craters. You have also a lot of inscribed sherds, 35% of the total there, which is quite kind of surprising because you have few inscriptions usually on Laconian pottery. At Colonna, at the sanctuary of Apollo near the ancient port of Aegean, we also have Laconian pottery, at least 15 vases, in 7 craters, but there are more, and that's what Gudrun Klebinder-Goos told me. So we have to talk to see what's happening there. In both cases, the majority of the vases dates back to the 6th century BC, the peak of Laconian pottery exports, but you have some from the late 7th and some from the mid 5th century BC. So it's basically the whole range of Laconian pottery exports. When in Miletos and in the previous networks that we were talking about, you have kind of a break of a gap in the mid 6th century BC. Then the argolid, it could look surprising why the Argive people, the most bitter enemies of the Spartans, would have used Laconian vases. Seems it's not a problem, so that's another argument to not over-interpret archaeological data with historical facts, because we have Laconian pottery in Argos, in the Argolid, some in Alliés on the coast, so it's in front of Aegina, it's from maritime, from shipping distribution. But in Argos, in the Aphrodisian, for example, you have some unpublished material, and the question is who dedicated them there? Argives, Laconian? We don't know so far. You have no inscribed sherds. What is interesting also there is that you have some Laconizing phenomena in the pottery. So the Argive people would have imitated the Laconian wares. That's interesting. So that's something I want to explore furthermore. Also for the Argolid, you have a lot of Laconian pottery at the borders of Argos, of the Argolid, between Laconia and the Argolid, especially in the Kinuria area, which was highly disputed between the two powers. And you see flows of Laconian pottery and then gaps. And so it's about political investigation of border sanctuaries. So there is something to be done there also. Crete, we'll see in detail later. Kythera, we know that it's full of Laconian pottery, but quantification is hard to do there because the main part of the material remains unpublished. And then the potential ramifications, as we will talk about it just afterwards. North Africa, because you have a lot of Laconian pottery, especially in Cyrene, which was published by Jerry years ago, and also by May, I don't remember the first name, recently. And the question is, who brought them there? Aegina, perhaps? We'll see. Egypt in Naucratis, it's a different case because there you have everybody, not everybody, the Ionians, the Aeginetans. It's an emborion, international emborion. So things there are a bit more complicated, but a lot of work has been done by Alexandra Willing and Alan Johnston. So we can draw some conclusions from Egypt. I will go back there at the end. And there the material is, as I was telling you, it's mainly black glazed pottery, especially Laconian stirred clay. from the late 7th to the mid 5th century, with what I call refuge markets in Kyrene, in Aegian, but also in Sicily. But that's another story that we'll explore just afterward. Some limits that I could already identify. I'm talking about 2 different networks with a potential chronological gap, the Aeginetan perhaps taking over some of the markets of the Milesians. But in fact, it's hard to distinguish in the main part of the main part of the time. And it's also hard to differentiate perfectly the scales of exchanges from the local to the international. And you have the question of the points of contact, which were provided by different actors in the Dodecanese, in Egypt, and in the Central Aegean, which the Cyclades being difficult area to explore further. So now let's move towards it's one of the case studies, and that's the one I want to explore with you today. So it's Crete, Laconia, and Kythera in between. Crete was strangely absent from the maps of diffusion of Laconian pottery in the Mediterranean. But the recent let's say, renewal of data in the island gives us now a new image of the island, and we can assume I want to at least to ask the question of a pivotal role of Crete in the organization of trade routes that are parts of much larger networks from the Peloponnese to Cyrenaica, Egypt, and the West via Kythera, the southern Cyclades, and the Dodecanese eventually. In Fabien Coudin's book, Crete was totally absent from the more than 3,000 objects referenced. So does this mean that there are no Laconian vases on the island? No, of course not. Konrad Stieber, in his 3-volume catalog about Laconian black glazed pottery, had already listed 19 items in Eleftheria and 18 amphoras in Komos, published by Alan Johnston. This underrepresentation of Laconian pottery in Crete struck me at first. Indeed, if you think about ancient navigation, especially in the archaic period, you don't have direct lines like nowadays. It's about coastal shipping. And I couldn't see how you could reach Northern Africa from Kythera, from Laconia, from the Cyclades without going through Crete, because the pivotal role of Crete was established by others during the Bronze Age. And afterwards, that was strange for me that we had Laconian pottery in Cyrene, Nocratis in Egypt, everywhere else in the Aegean, but not in Crete. That's logistically that was interesting, let's say. So I've explored a little bit further, and there is a publication of Brice Eriksson in 2010. What's the title? Crete in Transition. And there he dealt with Laconian pottery from several sites, including Eleftheria. And there we could see that indeed there is a Laconian pottery in Crete. And going through the reports, not all of them yet, I could identify at least 78 objects, artifacts, individual artifacts in at least 10 sites. Some of them being not published, the main part of them actually. So 78 artifacts, you may say it's not a lot. For the Laconian pottery, it is. It's 2% of total corpus, based on Fabien Coudin statistics and the statistics I am adding now. But in any case, they put Crete on the map. So from being previously considered as a blind spot, Crete now could become part of the question. And its role could be questioned also, especially for the North Africa case. So the Laconian Crete presents several specificities that should be highlighted. Laconian black figure vases are absent. Then Komos is a special case, a privileged case, because of its, let's say, its the presence of the transfrontal amphoras I was talking about before, which is the biggest assemblage and the most well published. And then you have a constant in the clear overrepresentation of Laconian black glaze craters, also imitated locally. So let's focus now on Eleftheria, because it was well published by Eriksson. Eleftheria, so in Western Crete, excavated by the University of Crete, especially the necropolis of Orthipetra, it has revealed at least 24 fragments of Laconian vases, including 21 craters, 24 individuals, sorry. The study of this assemblage is essential for several reasons. First, this is the most important assemblage from Crete. Secondly, these vases are partly from funerary, even though I should look further into it, because some should be from fields or even dumps. So I have to work on the contextual analysis. Then the overrepresentation of craters in the totality of in the total of Laconian pottery also raises the question of a specific local demand for this form. I've put you here two full craters because it's more easy to visualize than this. They are not from Crete, they are from Italy and from Etruria, very probably, and it's from the Louvre. So you have the group E and the group F. You've seen one of the group E before from Berezan in the Black Sea, and the group F on the right. It's the fully black glazed Laconian stirrup crater. You have both in Eleftheria, and you have both in general in Crete. I won't enter too much into details for the diffusion of the two groups. To use the network as a heuristic tool for pottery, a first way is to establish diffusion map for this discovery sites. In this case, and in addition to Crete, the group E craters are attested in Sparta, Samos, Miletos, Sicily, Etruria, Naucratis, Aegina, and Cyrenaica. With a map, it will be much better, I agree. But I still have to make them. And since the collection of data is not finalized, and now it's still in the form of lists and spreadsheets. So I'm talking about mapping and about the distribution map, but I just show you a list. Shame on me. So in this list of sites, you can recognize Miletos and Aegina, again, our two main candidates here for a major role in the distribution of Laconian pottery. The comparison shows similarities with the Laconian pottery assemblages also from Aegina, Gravisca, and Etruria, and from sites from Sicily, where the activity of Aeginetan traders has been well established. We know about the trading posts from return sources in Sicily, and a lot of work has been made about Gravisca, establishing a connection between Gravisca, Aegina, and Laconia. For example, I think it's in Boitani, Laconian shirt inscribed with the Etruscan alphabet. You also have, where is it? It's Alan Johnston, who identified the trademark S sigma Omicron, indicating potentially Sostratos, Aeginetan trader, on a Laconian shirt. Where was it found? Is it Gravisca? I'm not sure now. But you have, let's say, a group of indications showing that you have a connection between the three areas. So this preliminary comparative typological study shows that you have a strong demand for the shape of crater in general in Crete. In the other sites, it's Laconian craters everywhere, almost. In Lyctos, for example, you have three artifacts. They are craters. In Kydonia, 5 craters. So always about the Laconian crater. Then you have a long duration of exports, and you can identify kind of a resilience of the exports of Laconian pottery there until the middle of the 5th century BC. While the Laconian pottery exports, they collapse, they decrease highly almost everywhere during the second half of the 6th century BC. So what happens in Aegina, you see more or less the same thing happening in Crete. You see partly the same thing happening in Sicily. In Syria, it's a bit more complex, but I think there are some common points to highlight. So you have a kind of, let's say, what's the name? Faisceau, patchy, indications, a group of indications orienting towards deep similarities. So for fourth part, a Cretan hub. Cretan hub, I would even add within an Aeginetan network, because this typological proximity between the assemblages seem to indicate an involvement of the Aeginetans in the distribution. And what we can see in Erephthena, as I said, you can see the same thing in Kydonia and in Komos partly. In Kydonia, the present-day 5 craters have been discovered, as I was saying, and it's very interesting because Kydonia is said by Herodotus that it was a coastal city. The city was the subject of a war, of a battle between the Samian and the Aeginetans in 519, with Aeginetans allied to Cretans. And we know that the Samians were there only for 5 years before. So this event could be interpreted in a new light when one considers the supposed role of the Samians in the distribution of Laconian products after the fall of Miletos in the mid-6th century BC. The settlement at Kydonia and the following conflict could be interpreted as a manifestation of a commercial rivalry between Aegina and Samos to secure a strategic maritime stop on the shipping routes between Laconia, Crete, and eventually Cyrenaica and towards the west, at a time where exchanges networks and traffic roads were under deep reconfiguration. We also find in Kydonia 3 funerary stills bearing an epigram in Aeginetan alphabet and dated to the end of the 6th century BC to the beginning of the 5th century BC, confirming that the Aeginetans had settled there. So the role of Aegina as a central actor in trade in the area can also be seen in the use of Aeginetic money as an intermediary for trade in central and western Crete. We find minting of pseudo-Aeginetic staters in Kydonia from the victory against the Samians at the end of the 6th century BC, and we also have a coins hoard in Matalas of 71 coins immediately north of Komos. It is also noted that the Aeginetans were exiled from their island in 431 by the Athenians, and yet some of them fled to Kydonia, while others were settled by the Spartans in Tireatida on the borders of Laconia with the Argolid. Some of them even fighting alongside the Spartans against the Athenians during the Peloponnesian War. So these are historical facts. Doesn't mean, we don't have to overinterpret them, but still they show some, the deep connections between the Aeginetans and the Spartans in the area. Finally, to support the hypothesis of a role of the Aeginetans in the networks between Laconia and Crete, we can observe that the imports of Laconian pottery, but also of all pottery except Attic pottery, dropped sharply in the middle of the 5th century BC. exactly when Aegina was forcibly integrated into the League of Delos by Athens in 457. So the whole Crete fits with this idea of major role of Aegina. And the comparison of Cretan assemblages with those of Kythera, Thera, and even Cyrene, I hope will allow me to test this hypothesis that Crete constituted a major hub, let's say, within an Aeginetan network, linking Crete, Laconia, via Kythera, and even as far as northern Africa. This maritime route, is attested on several occasions in ancient sources. Here in Thucydides, we see that Kythera was a port to merchant ships coming from Egypt and Libya. For this island extends in all its length over the Sea of Sicily and the Sea of Crete. Among the cities strongly active in the management of the trading post of Naucratis in Egypt, we find no Cretan or Peloponnesian city, but we find Miletos, Samos, and Aegina, the three presumed actors of distribution of Laconian pottery, each founding a sanctuary of their own, while 9 cities of Minor Asia collectively founded the sanctuary of the Hellenian. In fact, the Ionian networks, Samos and Miletos in particular, seem to play a predominant role in these circulations between North Africa and the Aegean before the Persian conquest, perhaps hindered these networks. That's still an open question that is still hard to prove, but you have in any case a gap in the mid-6th century BC. And that would explain the rapid development of the Aeginetans' presence in Crete, with Aeginetans networks which would have subsumed the Ionian networks. So the networks in Crete are entangled. It's hardly surprising, and it will not be the first time. Because in the Minoan and the Mycenaean periods, Crete and its circumvolution already appear to have been at the center of a web of relations polarizing traffic from the south of Peloponnese via Kythera and Antikythera, from Asia Minor, the Levant, and North Africa. This is what Lens Vatrus tried to demonstrate about Komos. And this raises the question of the memory of networks and routes. But then is it a question of memory of the route or of geographical parameters that make a road used over the long term? Pascal Arnaud, in his work on the routes of ancient navigation, highlights the existence of a route between Cape Malea in southern Laconia, Crete, and Cyrenaica, based on the testimony of ancient geographers, more than on climatologic parameters. And according to Arnaud, the regularity of the winds allows exceptionally fast north-south connection. To understand the pivotal role of Crete, it's necessary to understand maritime navigation in its concrete dimension, and in particular, to consider the maritime parameters as winds, currents, reefs, and visibility, to go beyond the approach and consider the possibility of coastal shipping, as well as the memory of the routes, the needs, and also the tastes of consumption. In saying that, I want to underline that the proximity, the spatial proximity, doesn't make everything in a network, because spatial analysis has this tendency to, this island is close to this island, you have a network, but you have much more parameters that have to be taken into account. Having these elements in mind, stopping in one or several Cretan harbors seems inevitable. The north coast of Crete has been, for example, many important, there are many important sites with anchorages easily accessible by coastal shipping. There could have been redistribution points for the Cretan domestic markets, as well as shifting points from one sailing basin to another. There is also the question of opportunity costs, which vary according to the actors. On this point, the skills, the maritime knowledge of the Cretan sailors must be considered. This story of Herodotus about the colonization of Cyrene by the Therians, it's a very interesting account because we can see that the Therians, they were seeking information from the Cretans to guarantee the success of their expedition with the famous fisher, the Korobios, the Murex fisherman coming from Mytanos in eastern Crete. So you need a Cretan pilot to guide you until northern Africa, according to this passage of Herodotus. So with this passage in mind, let's conclude. This is just a modest contribution. It's only a glimpse, I would even say. These preliminary hypotheses need to be developed, but they outline the issues at stake in this project. The Cretan case first demonstrates that the Laconian vases can be used as an exploitable proxy for working on distribution networks and the integration of Laconian production into wider exchange systems. Secondly, it enables us to give a diachronic dimension to networks. Several reconfigurations of the distribution networks are noticeable during the period and tend to make Crete a commercial stopover, a secondary market, or on the contrary, a refuge market in context of crisis for the Laconian pottery. Thirdly, this example allows us to reconsider the heuristic framework of an export production mainly intended for Western markets. It was the main trend 4 years before, by placing the Aegean space at the center of the reflection and by proposing more complex distribution schemes. And in this way, far from being closed on itself, Laconia and Crete participate, even at a small level, in the archaic exchanges and system and cannot be reduced to mere stopovers on trans-Mediterranean routes. And finally, the project underlines the interest of the study of these regional markets, even small, even secondary, which can be entangled with each other, but also embedded into systems and exchanges polarized around more important actors and flow. That's why multi-scale analysis is essential to not make the Laconian pottery and these networks too important. I mean, once again, this is nothing compared to what arrives in Etruria. It's nothing compared to what goes in Cyrene, Crete. It's on the road, but still, we have to take them into account. And so that's why multi-scale analysis is essential, even though it's often hard to distinguish between the scales. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much.
I hope I've not been too long.
No, you were on time. Thank you so much for a very rich and inspiring presentation. I would open the floor to questions now. I myself already have at least a couple of 3 questions, but I would love to leave the floor to anybody else who has a question to break the ice. Okay, then I'll go first, and then you'll get more at ease. I'll start with the network question.
Yeah.
So of network, so Milesian network and an Aegean network, are they mutually exclusive? Could you elaborate on that, on the how you would see that? And talking about the Milesian network, wouldn't it be possible to consider a Milesian network also to bring the material in North Africa, considering, for example, as we know, from the Eastern Aegean, we know from sources from Herodotus too, that also in winter they could navigate, for example, from Rhodes to Egypt and all that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's reducing to separate. I mean, to
create these networks. For now, just let's say heuristic tool to make some sense. That's the problem with networks and distribution. It's fluid. It's based on actors. We cannot. I mean, you don't have regular lines. You have a lot of parameters that prevent us from fully understanding how something arrives from here or there. So no, it's not exclusive. I can see what I think I can see for now is that you have a major role of the Ionians, especially probably Miletos, during the late 7th and the first half of the 6th, and afterwards the Aeginetans seem to have a major role too. They had a role before, very probably, but they seem to take over perhaps some of the markets, regional markets. And what I can see that it's these regional markets with a beginning and an end. It's not an absolute end or not an absolute beginning, but you have a group of indications. I'm thinking in French now. You have a coherence at some point between some sites with some objects, and there you can see something appearing. It's never closed, it's never exclusive. You have this South Aegean regional market. Let's say that it's glazed Laconian stirrup craters in Kythera, in Crete, in Gravisca, in Sicily, in Northern Africa. But in Northern Africa, it's more complex than this. And in Algolid also, in the eastern shore of Peloponnese, and it seems to be brought there by the Aeginetans. That's the theory, and it's based on the black glaze pottery on the stirrup crater. Then the northern, let's say that you have different stories, different products for different sites with different chronologies.
Yeah.
And in the Black Sea, the northern Aegean and the Ionian, it's different stories than what you can see here in Crete. It doesn't mean that the Milesians or Samians have nothing to do with Crete, because you see that the Samians, even at the end of the 6th, they were involved in the distribution networks in Crete, in Kydonia, also in Nokrati. So you have probably different networks, competition, rivalries, like what we see appearing.
Between the products that are sold, so to say. So if I'm not mistaken, more black glaze pottery in this possible Aegean network and more black figured in the Milesian.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. In Miletos, in Samos, it's full of black figures. In Thasos also, it's full of black figures. Okay, you have also black glaze, but we don't know that much about it because it's not yet published. But in Crete, you don't have black figures. In Sicily, it's the same. In Peloponnese, it depends, but let's say they are not the same packages brought there. It's not the same offer, let's say.
And even in the same context, or does it change with regard to context?
The context in Aegina, you have different kind of context. Okay, the main context, they are from sanctuaries or from funerary context. You don't have that much information about domestic context. Yeah. So they are the two main contexts. In Crete, you don't always have the context in excavation. I mean, sometimes you just don't know what it is exactly. But you see that the black glazed stirrup craters, they can be taken into the grave, but also dedicated. In sanctuaries in Crete, not that much. No, in Eretherna, no. In Kydonia, I'm not sure yet about the context there in Kydonia. You have at least one of them from one of these cluster of graves where they found the Aegean steels. But I'm not that well advanced yet in the contextual analysis of the assemblages. So I don't know yet. No.
Thank you. Questions? There you go.
That was really interesting. Thank you. I think you really do a lot of work with the insurances itself. Like it's a big contribution. But I was wondering with the last definition of the disease that you didn't come back to the top, maybe you do it in the papers. I was wondering, because like one of the points of studying the is like when you look at in your paper working, and I guess so you also have to do observations and things like that.
I didn't understand if I look into what with the
Oh,
product?
into the product.
The production, yes.
No, into the production, I mean like the products that were also, so like some of the pottery would be used to import products, so like.
What was in it?
Oil,
Yes,
yeah.
the amphora, yes.
Yeah.
The problems that we don't have a lot of identified Laconian transport amphoras. But yeah, that's taken into account. But for now, I am still spotting the deposits to see where they have been found. For now, Comos in Crete is still the main assemblage, but yeah, I'm taking it into account. And about the content of Laconian transport amphoras, as far as I know, there is only one study of the residues inside. It's in Massalia, in southern France, and wait, now I don't remember if it's wine or oil. I think it's wine. They've studied the treatment surface inside, and it was probably for wine, but with a lot of insecurities. But yeah, I'm taking it into account, but we don't have a lot of data for now. And there is also the question of even if they contain wine or oil, is it from Laconia? Because you can import empty vases even just as a bulk. So it's attested. So we need a lot of data with the amphoras to properly track traffic of perishable goods. I have it in mind, but for now I don't see how I can really answer the question. We'll see.
Lots of food for thought, Adrien, thanks. And I agree that I think that there is an Aegean network from the second half of the 6th century. I think that you made the case and you had a lot more information than I was aware of, but I agree. And I think that Dr. Williams' publications hinted at that, and I think it's a good foundation for your theory. There's that anomaly at Comos in that amphoras are dated by Alan Johnston as being 7th century. And so it's really sticks out like a sore thumb compared with all of its other black glaze material. Also that sticks out is that it's all black glaze from Crete. You'd expect there to be some decorated pottery of Crete is in fact a regular port of call coming straight down from Laconia to North Africa. And the alternative route to get to North Africa, instead of coming straight down, is via East Crete, and then down to Naucratis, which you didn't talk about too much.
No, not too much.
And then from Naucratis along the coast and back again, or a circular route one way or the other. But I do agree that in there, one of the problems with Crete is in the first half of the 6th century, there seemed to be a major decline in cultural evidence, let's put it that way, for the whole island. So suddenly you get this huge drop from the 7th century Crete, where you get so many different types of pottery, including Cretan pottery, and then there's a big gap.
Yeah.
And something's happening there in Crete, and as much as Bryce might want to fill in the gaps, there's still a gap there as far as I can see. So the network in the first half of the 6th century, I think, you talk about one network, I really think that there's two networks, probably separate ones, the Milesian and separately the Samian. I think that both traders are very busy going east to west and west to east, passing by Laconia and regularly stopping at Italiana or one of the other places and picking up pottery. So I would rather see because I think with the rivalry and the tensions between Miletus and Samos, there is evidence to be found to suggest that there are, in fact, some break really in the communication between those two city-states, which may reflect that rivalry, including the almost total lack of Aegean pottery on Samos. So anyway, that of course makes it more complex to try to separate where the Samian network may be kicking in and where the Milesian network might be involved. But I have no doubt that there is a Milesian network and that it probably is stronger and a little bit earlier than the Samian.
Yeah, I totally agree with you about the Milesian and about the Samians and the Milesians. Yeah, I find it hard to distinguish between the two. So yeah, perhaps the Chian pottery could be a proxy, an indication. Perhaps also yeah, what happens in the Black Sea could be an indication. And about the north-south road between northern Aegean and the Dodecanese and Naucratis. I remember that you have a lot of transport amphoras from Mende, from the Kharkiviki, from the northern Aegean, arriving in Naucratis. And I don't know who manages this. Is it the Milesian or the Samians? In some places you have Samian amphoras, in some others not. But I've not done yet a proper comparative study of the assemblages of transport amphoras. But yeah, in any case, I find it hard to distinguish between the Samians and the Milesians. That's a big question to me still.
I think there's some material still from Miletus, Laconian material from Miletus, that is waiting to be published. The way they divided up the material is that they gave the transport amphoras to another scholar. I don't remember, but there may well be some, or a great variety of transport amphoras that might help clarify things once they're published from Miletus.
Yeah, and about the gaps in Crete, yeah, I agree. Even with the work of Ericsson, it fills some blanks, but still you have a lack of that 6th century. But why is that? Perhaps it could be also because we have we don't know how to identify it. Perhaps you have a long-lasting production of some shapes. It's a question I am asking myself for Laconia. What's happening in the second half of the 5th and during the 4th? Because we don't know yet the typology for the chronology. She stopped in the mid 5th, but do they last more? And we just put an ending in our chronotypology, and we are just blinding ourselves. But okay, if you don't have the context, you cannot do much more.
That's right, we need context.
Yeah, we don't have classical context from the 5th. But in Crete is hard to investigate. After Laconia, going to Crete, it's also full of blanks and blind spot. And I don't know, except Itanos, I don't know a lot about Eastern Crete, what's happening there, because I've seen for now it's that Laconian pottery is a bit everywhere, but you have a connection with Western Crete, a bit with Elyctos, with the Central Crete. But is Itanos really, Itanos and Comos at the end of the Mesara Valley, is it exactly the same story than the others? Because you can go all around the Crete, but are they from the same roots? I don't know, and I don't know how it connects exactly with the Cyprus, for example. We don't have anything from Cyprus almost in Shtiva.
Very, very little. One or two.
Yes, and that's strange to me too. This blind spot.
Okay, any other questions? Are there any questions from you, Martina? No. No, okay, then my last question is Greek. When you showed your map with the possible networks and the possible maritime routes that you were designing, you highlighted production spots. Does that mean that there are kilns that have been excavated? Because always the issue with Laconian pottery.
There are some.
Player?
No, from the FRA.
From the FRA.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what they issue this summer in Lyon. But
Okay.
the
Arcade or
potentially
okay.
it's not yet published. I don't know a lot about it. But there are kilns that could help us in the future, but they have to be dated. But potentially some could be archaic or classical.
There was one kiln that has been dated as archaic, found to the southeast of the province in Sparta.
Okay.
Near some graves.
The Christu
1960. Just this one.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
there it is in the middle of really the settlement of Sparta,
Yeah.
and it does seem to be archaic.
Perfect.
So
That's the only one that was known until.
these ones,
Yeah.
the upper rate.
Mm.
And actually, I don't remember what they said about when it's at the conference,
I will see in the paper, but I think there are two clusters of kilns in two different places, but I don't remember exactly. And there are also some kilns in the Malea Peninsula, but they are probably later.
Okay.
And it's not published.
Okay. We'll see.
But there are some data appearing for the production for the kilns, but we don't have wasters. We cannot connect wasters and kilns. So
We'll see.
we'll see.
There's a plan, and I'm sure Adrien is more aware, obviously, to do some clay analysis
Okay.
in Laconian.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much. No question whatsoever. Okay, so thank you so much, Adrien, for this presentation. Thank you, all of you, for attending and for the interesting questions that you posed. I'm very happy to invite you to our little reception now, so that the shyest among you can talk with Adrien with the help of wine.